welcome back to another episode of Rap Drinks. Today we have Larry Fessenden, who is a director, producer, and the owner of the New York-based production company Glass Eye Pix. Larry's film credits include Depraved, Habit, and his most recent film Blackout, which is currently available on streaming. So Larry, thank you so much for coming on to Rap Drinks and chatting with us about being an indie producer in the industry today. Cheers.
Nice to be here. Day drinking. What an excuse.
Yeah. Perfect excuse to hang out and talk.
Mm-hmm.
So Larry, I know you kind of indirectly. I've worked on Glass Eye Pix Productions, but we also recently had Brian Spears on our show to talk about just working as a makeup artist on horror films. But I know you have a lot of experience working in the horror genre. So I'm curious, is like what fascinates you so much about the horror genre that you made it just like your career?
Well, now we're to child psychology and that sort of thing. I mean, I just grew up liking horror. I instinctually watched horror movies as a kid. You know, I grew up in the 70s, so you had chiller theater and this sort of thing on TV, Channel 11, Channel 5, and they would have scary movies. And the real historical truth is that in the 60s, there was a deal made where Universal and a few dumped all their movies onto television in sort of a package deal. So Wolfman, Frankenstein, and Dracula. And I think historically that led to these movies being on TV and a whole generation of kids really tuning into them. And then came Famous Monsters of Filmland and other sort of magazines for kids. And then there were the comic book wars, and there were monsters in comics, and then there were the monster models. So I'm a demographic, the kids that grew up loving Frankenstein, Wolfman, Dracula. And to this day, I'm known as the guy that's sort of trying to recreate those movies. But then I grew up, went to fancy schools, and basically got an education and become interested in like philosophy and social issues. So my movies are 1940s Wolfman blended with contemporary things. Because when I got older, I loved Scorsese and the movies of the 70s, Altman, and movies that challenged our presumptions about society and so on, asked questions, and had the so-called anti-hero. You know, you think of Taxi Driver, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, all those movies were really profound to me. So my agenda has been, as an artist, is to combine those sort of aesthetics. And, I can keep talking. I built a company because I found like-minded people who loved cinema, going to the movies. See, I grew up in New York, so I went to double features of movies that were just a couple years old, like Little Big Man or Clockwork Orange. So even, I just started being exposed to that kind of cinema. And then at the same time, because it was a kid of the TV generation, this is before VHS or any that kind of access, you'd watch what was on TV. And so I saw old movies like Cary Grant and Bette Davis and this sort of business. And then I lived in New York, so eventually there was that wave of foreign films. So then you become exposed to Bergman and other things, and Jacques Tati, who's a very funny filmmaker, a French guy. So, I had it all. I'm a New Yorker, that's the thing.
So you grew up in New York, so you were exposed to a lot of cinema, because you sound like you can quote films at this point. Like you sound like a film nerd.
Yeah, I think so. Although the truth is that then you hang out with real film nerds, and it's a whole other ball game because people who can quote movies and all of that. Although I can do most of Quint's speeches, from Jaws, but the thing is, I also have a lowbrow, highbrow sensibility. I did mention Bergman, but I found him a little obscure. I loved, like, Woody Allen. You got to remember, this is the 70s. These movies came out, and they were so startling because they were more frank than the movies you saw on TV when you were a kid. You know, Cary Grant or I don't know what. James Cagney was my favorite. We would have double bills in the city. I discovered Polanski, and but then you could go to Rocky Horror Picture Show or, as I say, Taxi Driver. I caught up with Kubrick. All of this is because they had great rep theaters here, which are all basically gone.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, that whole scene is gone. It's unfortunately.
Yeah.
I'm curious about like you making, I guess, the transition from childhood to being in love with horror films and then directing your first film or producing your first film. What was that like jump like for you to getting started? Like, what was the drive to really just start making your first movie?
Well, the one thing I haven't emphasized is that I was an actor in high school, and I did a lot of acting, and that seemed, when I went to a movie, it was the actors I responded to. I didn't really know what a director was. This was, once again, you got to understand, you put on this mindset. Like in the 70s, there was no Premiere magazine. There was no Blu-rays with making ofs. There was no, there wasn't even Entertainment Weekly. Even some of those things I'm quoting probably seem slightly obscure to a new generation. Well, one thing that was profound is I remember when they started publishing the box office. Like every Monday, they'd say how movies did. And it just sort of monetized movies for the audience. You never knew that before. Now you know exactly which movie's doing well. You know that Furioso didn't do well. And you're like, well, geez, it was cool. Well, I guess now we're supposed to sort of feel sorry for it. That's just all new stuff for a new generation. So anyway, when I grew up, movies were mysterious and special, and you really related to the actors. I loved, as I say, Cagney from the old days, and then I was in the wave that loved Nicholson and De Niro and Pacino. And, it's funny, I skipped the Brando years because that's a generation older than me. Like my friend Ron Perlman will always talk about Brando, and you just realize for him that was in the 50s. You'd watch Brando movies, and he seemed to be doing something different and exciting. All of that. So I would put on plays in high school and so on, and then I got more and more ambitious, and I started to want to direct them and sort of run them. So I think that was starting, and it's because I was just an art kid. I like to build the sets. I like to draw the pictures and imagine. So I realized in a weird way when it all comes down to it, because I was a film director. Because that's what a director does. He just has to kind of or she has to understand all the ins and outs of the whole project. And so, yeah. So the answer to your question, though, is like 1979, I think I got a Super 8 camera, and I would film little stories. Now, before that, I had done animation and filmed a lot of things, but with a pal and so on. So, no, my first movie is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, so I don't know why. There you go. You see, horror was always sort of my go-to. That's an unfinished work, but, and the transformation scene is out of focus, which probably helps it, but it is funny because I'm acting like, and this whole thing, I basically haven't grown up since. But I turned my entire bedroom in a New York apartment where my family raised me into the doctor's lab, and I'd have all the things. And, my mom, she really was quite forgiving. She let me do this for a year. It was just, she was quite a neat homemaker and so on. And then she'd walk into my room, and I'd have, the piles of paper and the beacons and all this. Anyway, we finally shot the scene, and it was out of focus. But there you have it. And then that was a Super 8 camera that I'd borrowed, but I started understanding, like, wow, it's so cool, like, to have the equipment, and what would it be like? So one day, it came to pass that I got a Super 8 camera, and I made in the 70s and early 80s, short Super 8 movies. Like, this is not, every kid nowadays would make a movie with their video camera or something. Yeah. And I went to a fancy prep school, and I got kicked out for drinking. And
Cue the beer.
Hey guys, we appreciate you watching Rap Drinks, but we need your support. You can directly support Rap Drinks by buying us a beer. With your donation, we'll give you a shout out on an episode and thank you for your contribution. Your beer purchase helps support the show without relying on a ton of advertising. So use the link below to keep us hydrated. Thanks.
But all I wanted to do was go to NYU, because in those days, so now this is like 1979 or 80, the only place you could be a filmmaker was, or so it seemed, was one school in LA, whatever it's called, UCLA. And NYU. So I just wanted to go to NYU. And I'm a New Yorker at heart, I suppose. So it's made sense to me to come home to
stay here.
Yeah. And so I did get in because of Super 8 movies I'd made. And I don't know, I think I did a summer program. It almost felt like I snuck in the back door. But what I always admit is that I think because my parents could pay for it, that I think NYU was like, sure, if you could pay, you'd come. I don't know how it worked, but I got in. And then I moved downtown, and so now I'm sort of getting involved in film, and that's when I discovered video. So this is like 1981 or 2, and I was like, oh my God, you can film a whole fucking movie, or you can film an hour of material on a videotape. It's going to cost you $7 or whatever it might have been.
What was the video camera at that time?
These were Sony cameras, and this was right as, all the drama of the technology. I still remember when they were talking about laser discs, and it was like this fascinating thing. It was in the future, but it was in the near future, and it was like you could technically choose your own adventure with a laser disc. You could choose what the end was, which is just to say a menu would somehow offer you that possibility, and that was just like amazing. And ironically, years later, I made the video game with my pal. We wrote Until Dawn, which is a beloved now horror video game where you choose your adventure. So, obviously video games in general, but this has its own legacy because it was psychological. So, blah, blah, blah. But when I was at NYU, I just went to the video department. That's where I learned to edit, because we do this TV show. There was this thing where you had, it's called public access, and you take a videotape to 23rd Street and give it to the people behind the curtain, and then your show would be on TV at night, just like on the dial, be channel 5, 11, and 9, and then on, I don't know how it worked, but, channel Z or something on the cable box was our show. So that felt amazing. Now you put your thing on YouTube. It's all good.
That's what I was going to ask. Did you, like, when you were making the Super 8 stuff before you got to the video, did you have a way of getting your stuff out there, or was it just...
No.
It was more for yourself?
But that's a cool thing. And, I still tell the kids, look, the way you do this is you build a community. So what I would do is I'd show my movies at parties and stuff. And I had a Boogie Box. And the Boogie Box, the leader in the film would play. And then at a certain moment, I'd push the Boogie Box and the sound would be in sync. Because in those days, every motor on every machine was different. Like your cassette player was going to go at a certain speed. So you always had to have the same projector and the same Boogie Box. And I was in Brooklyn, and I was showing the movie, my Super 8, with this system. And on our way home, my French girlfriend was carrying the Boogie Box, and I had the projector. And these dudes came up, and they tried to rob us, and they tried to grab her, and I grabbed them both, and they kicked me in the tooth. So that's, we just got into the tooth story. I lost my tooth defending my girlfriend, and my Boogie Box, which is the only one that would play my movies in sync.
You hated it.
It's like, this is a fucking serious Boogie Box. And we kept both, although the girl rejected me eventually, and then I lost the Boogie Box in that game 3-card Monty. I was talk about New York stories. I was so sure that the fucking P was under the middle card that I said, all right, it's right under the middle card, and look, I got this box. And the dude, he picked up the card, grabbed the box, and a car drove, but this is on 14th Street, a car just drove by, and they put the box in the car, and off it went.
Wow.
Wow.
I once almost traded in my saxophone, and I thought, I got to remember the Boogie Box thing. It's not going to be under the middle card. I can't do it again.
Oh, my God.
Thank God. So we did the TV series for cable access for, a year. I think there are 9 or 12 episodes or something. It's me and my pal, and we would try to film on the weekends, and, he'd never write the scripts, and too much alcohol and all this. But we got all this crazy material and everything, and then... I'd edit it all week, and that's how I learned to edit. Talk about, putting a lipstick on a pig. It was just like, how do we make this good? I was producing so much that eventually the classes where I was, bound, they were like, you don't have to come to class. You're supposed to create a 10-minute piece for your class. You're making half-hour shows every week. So, and then I would come in and teach the class that I was in, which doesn't speak about quality. So this is it's not a boast. It's just saying, I was in the trenches. You asked what the equipment was. So we shot on these Sony Portapacks. So you'd put this huge thing on,
Suitcase.
and you'd put the tape, just like a giant cassette. But the irony is, it was pretty good quality. And then you still had a boom mic type thing. Maybe the cameras had mics. It's interesting because I was obsessed with camera work. I loved the idea of being, graceful with the camera and so on. And so, but these cameras also had autofocus. So there was this one sort of cheat. So I became a good cameraman, but was never quite, that level of being a good
pull focus.
focuser. Yeah. So, the chinks in the armor began in bad training, but I did love video for what it could do. And it had its own qualities too. Of course, it had those tails in those days because the light would lag and so on. So it just, it had personality, which a lot of people would now celebrate, or at least you'd use that to convey that era. So I'm basically not going to college, but I'm living in the East Village now. And so I take the video cameras out and I film bands and I film just things on the street, the bands that spill out on the street. So I really, I love just the reality around me, and that was a sort of a tradition of kind of capturing footage, and I'd be known as that dude. And then I bought, at tremendous expense, 3/4-inch equipment. So now I became the editor for the downtown community, and I had people like Steve Buscemi had a comedy routine with his friend Mark Boone. Mark Boone is also a well-known, beloved actor. He's sort of on Sons of Anarchy and crops up in Scorsese movies. He's got a big beard. He's a cool dude. Anyway, they had a comedy stand-up thing. And, so I would edit actors' reels and then performance artists. So this was sort of the vibe, and that's how I started bringing in some money and getting a reputation and getting connections. And in a way, that's sort of the beginning of me being a producer, because people come to me. I mean, a producer is many things, and what I'm not is like the guy that'll give you the budget and know the SAG rules and you kind of absorb it. You got to deal with it, but it's not like that's what my forte was. I would never claim it. Whenever I get a producer credit, I always make sure you understand there's somebody with boots on the ground and they were doing the real work. But what I was is a cheerleader and a psychoanalyst, So for the people I was editing with, I was like, oh, so your next show, you should definitely consider this. And, so it was more about that. And it was a genuine love of cinema and what it could be, which is just to say, I don't know what you'd call it, media, but, I caution saying content. I don't like that vibe. It just is more like turning it into a product for people to make money off of, as opposed to the artists being in control and so on. So those ideas. But so that's how I got started. And as I say, got to know some of the downtown people, but I remember when Jim Jarmusch and Spike Lee were starting to put out their features, and I was already able to be jealous, whereas I had no real idea how it would get to where they got. And yet I felt like sort of tangentially in the community, like there was a video place you could finish your movies called Film Video Arts, and Spike's sister was there. So, it all felt like, but it was a good thing. It was empowering. It felt like people that I knew were coming up in the world and they were starting to make. So this was the beginning of what we know now as indie cinema, but it was a really cool thing. And there was this little festival called the American Festival. Well, that turned into the Sundance Festival, the bane of my existence. But, this is, Loyd Kaufman, the great guy who runs Trauma, he always sees me. He's like, Fessenden, you're the Sundance horror filmmaker. I'm like, I've never been to Sundance, dude. I mean, I've been, but always peering over the fence. So, fuck that shit. Anyway, in a way, I was making art, and we were doing live shows. Like I had a friend named the Impact Addict, and he would wrap himself in bubble wrap and jump off a building.
What?
And I would be his videographer, and then I would edit them, and they'd be these cool confessionals about how he grew up watching Disney movies and having false expectations of what heroism was. I mean, they're great. They're still classics. So he was just a really physical, as I say, he blew himself up, wrapped himself in fireworks during the Chinatown New Year's, and he turned from a rabbit into a big bunny when it was the year of the rabbit turning into the bunny. So that's
It's like Jackass before.
well, it was
Jackass.
Jackass before Jackass. Thank you, sir. That's
Yeah.
exactly what it was. And so those were cool, and I was very content to be in that world while still, watching great films being made in the.
So as you're doing this, you're like you said, you're much more of a producer, a facilitator, helping a lot of other people. Do you still pursue acting during all this, or have you kind of moved on from that and you're more interested in this other?
It's a really interesting. Well, it's interesting to me. Question like, what the fuck was I doing? I mean, I was also working with theater. You see, I was digging multimedia and like I would do the video parts of sort of new theater and I mean these were challenging. They were cool. They were about all kinds of political and otherwise, challenging stuff, and yet it felt very tactile and robust. And that's the answer. So I auditioned for this play in downtown New York, and it was all my pals were involved in it, and this crazy guy who looked like Elvis Costello, who was the writer. He was a British dude, and he'd written this 200-page play, and it was like a 2.5-hour play, just on 12th Street. This is when there was indie theater. And I auditioned for the lead, and I didn't get it. And I think in my mind, I was so bitter that I said, well, I'll make the movie then. So, I mean, it must have taken a year, but it was an amazing experience. And it's why my wife fell in love with me. She's like, if you're that crazy, this is cool. So
Right.
it's still watchable. It's just the sound is funky, but it's all part of it. And now the only reason I didn't distribute it is that I didn't quite understand about music licensing. And that's actually something it's a huge part of Glass Eye Pix, and I make sure that the music licensing, I basically say you should basically meet young musicians.
Yeah.
You should compose yourself. My son is a filmmaker. He's composed all his movies. In other words, this is a serious matter because I feel 1985, this movie was completed. It's called Experienced Movers. And, it's unshowable in any technical way, in any legal way because of all the music I piled in.
Right.
And now all the tapes are so old, I don't even know how I could ever separate it. And maybe that's not the point. But anyway, it's a 2.5-hour movie with all these crazy actors, and it's very colorful and unlike anything I've ever done since, really. It's a caper movie, and they're robbing the French Art Museum, and it's all these crazy people, and they're pugs and their dogs, and the dog is murdered, and then the whole movie is about revenge. I mean, long before John Wayne, let me just tell you, excuse me. And I think Keanu would be quite good in one of the roles for the remake. My wife keeps telling me to remake it. I'm telling you to this day, but I can't deal with the writer. He tried to ruin me. He just said I was overbearing. There was a strange, bitter rivalry, and I believed everything he said, that I was a terrible person. So. But I finished the movie, and it was cool. And in those days, and this sort of began my mania with self-distribution and becoming your own person and fuck the system, is that I made a beautiful cover, and I took it to the video stores. And in those days, you could do that. And so all my videos were at Kim's Video and all the local video stores. All those Impact Addict videos, they were absolutely classics. And then this movie, Experienced Movers. So... I mean, everybody's like, Larry, why didn't you go to Hollywood? It's like, I don't know. I can't quite think that way. I just I guess I have a problem with authority. So, but it was cool to think that your movie was renting along with, I don't know what, Forrest Gump or some shit. So this was how I felt. And we had our TV show on the TV, the same, you could watch it in a bar. So I've always believed in that sort of self-propulsion and standing up for your own work. And
You don't need to go there because you're already doing it here.
yeah, that's. I mean, and I really I hope this isn't just my story. I'm saying this is one way to assert yourself. And now the kids have every other thing. They have their iPhones. You make a movie on an iPhone, go for it. They have YouTube. You can make your own channel and make it a destination for people. And I have friends. This has existed. Drew Daywalt. he's just one guy I'm pulling out of the hat, but he used to make really good, like 90-second horror movies, and he gained a reputation, and we almost made a feature for him. And then oddly, he made a children's book, and he literally got rich off of it, about crayons. You know, that's the thing. I knew I had that idea, and I just didn't think to do it. So blessed be for Drew Daywalt, but he was a great horror filmmaker. Anyway, so he used the modern version of everything I'm saying, and it was more effective in the sense that, well, we all know Talk to Me was also, I'm not sure if you're all horror keyed in, but Talk to Me was a recent horror hit, and I think that started on YouTube. See, I'm not a cinephile. I may be wrong. Anyway, it's possible, and now I'm talking about YouTube. I suppose I should be talking about TikTok.
But I mean, I guess that is something. It's there's so many ways to get your thing out now. It's almost overbearing. So like, how do you choose?
I appreciate that, and I think the answer is I'm too old to answer it, because what I did was very old school, but it felt solid. Yeah. And it still has an impact. For example, I mean, so what happened is I started Glass Eye Pix. I chose the name when I made that Experienced Movers, that crazy movie. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I want to have a company, presents, because it was all just me. Yeah. So I was like, Glass Eye Pix. Well, a girlfriend had given me a glass eye and said, this is because you have insight. And it was just, and obviously it was because it was a little macabre, and she thought that was cool, and I loved that. And then I thought, Pix is an old variety expression. In those days, variety would talk in tongues. You'd get the magazine and say, Sticks, Nicks, Hicks, Pix. That's a very famous one. And if you analyze it, it means, well, here we go. All right. So Sticks, Nicks, Hicks, Pix. That means movies in the sticks, out of nowhere. Sticks, Nicks, they say no to movies about Hicks. Sticks, Nicks, Hicks, Pix. All right. So that's how variety used to be. Even when I was young, I would get variety, and they still use that. And it was kind of an insider thing, and it made everybody feel good. So it's in a Cagney movie, Yankee Doodle Dandy, where he reads that and he goes, Sticks, Nicks, Hicks, Pix. What's that mean? And so it always tickled me. And then so I named my thing Glass Eye Pix. And then I would put that on anything I did. Sometimes I use it instead of my name because I just like the idea of having a brand. It was like a record label. I mean, jumping from movies. I did know as a kid that Universal made the horror movies, MGM made the musicals, Paramount made The Godfather, RKO was kind of poor, and on it goes. So even, and then you had Hammer, they made the British horror movies, and Amicus, and so on. So as a kid, just reading whatever literature there was about movies, you kind of get a sense of branding. But certainly in music, Motown and Stax record, all that. So this is all very generational. I don't think kids care about this shit anymore, but it was cool for me.
I don't know. I feel like kids now see A24 and they're like, I gotta
go.
Yeah, okay. There are definitely
and Neon to some degree. I don't know if it has the same, but A24 absolutely is a brand. So whatever they did good. They did good, and I believe in that. It's a way of saying we're a family. I mean, the problem is we've put all that into our politics, and that's not where you want it. Branding in politics. You want it in things that are cool, and you feel like, oh yeah, they discovered that artist and that artist, and so there's a consistency there, and there usually are people behind the brand that have a vision of something.
It almost gives you like an air of something that's bigger than you by putting a name on it instead of just you.
And actually, I would say, once again, trying to make this relevant to a viewer, the superpower is that you're saying it's not just the one artist. There's a number of people in this family. And now with Glass Eye, there are a number of people. There's Ty West. There's Kelly Reichert. She's an independent artist who does not make horror movies at all, but she's well regarded as a indie female filmmaker. Meaning a pioneer in her time. And then there's Jim Mickle. He made Sweet Tooth for Netflix. So he came up through my company, and I supported his early films, and now he's doing very well for himself. Glenn McQuaid was on. We made a movie for him. Now he's making a film in England. So the point is and if you ever go to my website, you see that I speak about all those people as alumni or pals. In other words, I want to both. It's to my benefit, but it's also to say let's keep track of people and sort of see how it all. And of course, Brian Spears. The whole point is I like working with the same people over and over. I don't always do that, but at least with certain things. With Brian, I always go back to him. I say, let's make one more cool monster, and he's game. So I think that's what a brand is. A brand is just a story.
The timeline you guys have is great.
Yeah.
I was looking at that on your website, and it's like there's very few places that actually document.
Oh, I love that you're saying that. You mean the actual timeline?
Yeah, the timeline on your
so
website.
cool.
It's like it literally from the start, and then it breaks down everything that happened along it. And it's like it's its own piece of film history in the sense that like there's very few places that you can go. Like you can't go to Paramount's website and see everything that they produced way back when, So it's like
hide it.
Right, exactly. But it's
Well,
cool because it's
true.
it's even like, oh, Ty started PAing here, and then it's like, okay, now you move 7 years in the future, and he's making his own feature for these guys. Like,
I'll say that the collateral is that it's self-serving, but really the motivation is what I went back to. I said I was a monster kid. You see, you would read magazines about Karloff and Lugosi and how Karloff, he was late in his career. He'd already made like 30 movies, maybe it's 40, I don't know, but as a tiny bit player. And then he was discovered and asked to play Frankenstein's monster. So blah, blah, blah. So that's so cool. And you're like, wow, what a story. But then, Lugosi had turned down the role because he didn't want to be under makeup, because he had sort of a paranoid, because he couldn't speak English well. He was anxious that he was always being taken advantage of. On it goes. So personalities determined their history and whatever. These are stories. If you're a nerd, that's fun. I know if you're in sports, you know people's averages and they get traded and how this works. I mean, that's not my zone, but it's cool. And that's what life should have, these pleasures. I suppose if you're an opera fan, you have all of that shit to deal with. So blah, 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 blah. But then there's the Glass Eye Pix fans. They're not quite as many as the Puccini fans. But so I like to lay it out and sort of let people enjoy the journey that we've all been on and so on. So
back to your question about like which, I guess avenue do you choose for your movies, like now versus, back then. Like back then I feel like films were a tangible thing. Like there was also a sort of exclusivity to it when like a movie was made, it's screened in the theater, and then you could buy a copy of it. Maybe haven't figured it out yet, but I just would love to talk about the comparison between the two now, because I feel like that's sort of lost now.
Eventually I made a movie in 1990, raised the money, mostly private funds, meaning, I went to the uncle and this kind of thing, and put the money together and made a big movie. And we shot in film in those days. And everybody was like, oh, well, you could use video. I was like, I'm making videos in the 80s. I'm ready to be a big boy. So I made a movie. It was it was a flop, but eventually became a tax write-off. This is my joke about, just business and the world. But it got a little bit of attention as such a weird movie. It's called No Telling. And, you sell your foreign rights. I got I think a video deal. It didn't click so much, but I did festivals and I started getting a taste, and I was brought into the horror community, and I went to an amazing festival called Avoriaz in France, and I got into some magazines, so there was a little bit of interest, but I felt fairly broken by it. Didn't make money back for my investors, and it was like, wow, this is tougher than I thought. And so what I did is actually just moped around and in the East Village, and then I met this woman, Kelly Reichert, and she was going down to make her movie. Now, the one thing is, like, making my film didn't break me of my passion for how to do things and all that earlier stuff that I had to offer to artists. So I basically encouraged her, and she invited me to play the lead in her movie. So I went down to Florida and we shot like for $60,000. It was different from my movie, had cost too much. And for $60,000, I could be her supporter and advocate She felt like as a woman she wasn't respected. I mean, these are fascinating, sad truths about the business and just about her experience. In any case, the people she was able to get to work on this movie were she didn't feel were respectful, and so I was the last man standing, and then I edited the movie, and we edited on that 3/4 equipment I told you about. So we didn't rent a flatbed. We didn't do anything. It was absolutely cost $0, but it was a lot of work because it was all by eye, and I won't even go into it, but 3/4 inch is not linear editing. It's, or I'm saying it is linear. It's not what we think of now as editing. No, because every time you make a cut, it degrades the material, so your source goes over to your new tape, and then if she wants to see a different edit, I would take that tape and put it in here. So this version, the final version, is getting incredibly degraded, but it represents the idea. So we would cut that way, and then I would lay the original footage on top so she could present it and raise money for the post and so on. It was absurd and arduous, but I became the greatest eye matcher on the planet because I could tell. I can still to this day go, it's that frame. That frame's the same as that frame, and so on. Wow. And eventually I did it for 3/4 to the negative. So we did have one work print. So I would go and I would cut the work print to match the video, and I'd be like, his hand's here. I see 2 fingers, and there's a little blur under that. Go to the movie. So I did all of that. Then she got into Sundance, and her career took off. And I'm one of the actors in it, so it was fun for me, and I knew that I had helped her. So then she got small distribution. It didn't go the way she wanted, but her reviews were fantastic. So Kelly Reichardt became a legitimate filmmaker. Now, she didn't make another movie for 4 or 5 years, and so there's her story. The one thing I learned from Kelly's movie was like, oh yeah, I one thing I know is how to make movies. And then I said, oh, Habit, the vampire movie. Oh, of course, I can do that, and I'll star in it. I didn't know that at first. So I wrote the script. I actually wrote it at Sundance while she was having her success, and she wouldn't call it that. But for me, it was like, I'm the editor on this. You're going down doing the Q&As. I'm just the little mule. And and so I'm like tapping my new script that's going to cost $60,000 and not a penny more, and shoot in New York and all this, anger and energy, and it's about an alcoholic, all the self-pity and self-hatred, everything. And so I had my one friend, and I said, we're going to make this movie. And we did a reading. And the guy that played the character of the main character, I was like, I mean, nice guy, but the character didn't come alive off the page. And I was like, this is going to be exhausting directing someone to act, I admit it, like me. So then I said, I'll just do it. So we made this very small film. I love to say we had 5 crew members. So my friend Dayton, he was an insane inventor. He had been on the expensive movie, No Telling. But we'd be pals, and so I invited him to be part of this. And then we did an open call, which in those days you'd put it in the newspaper, wanted, young woman, androgynous, must be willing to do sex scenes for an indie vampire movie. And we got a stack of photos. That's how it was in those days. You get the photo in the mail. And I remember we went to a bar, and we were opening the photos. The first one I pulled out, first one, this woman, Meredith Snyder. I said, look, Dayton, we have our vampire. And indeed, we auditioned her, and she was fantastic.
How did you? Sorry to interrupt. How did you raise the funding for something like this at that time? Like $60,000 is, by today's measures, is not a lot, but it's still a significant amount to raise to make a feature film. How did you raise the funding for that?
I can barely remember because it had been so many years of squirreling the money aside, knowing that I had to make a no-budget movie.
So this was some of your money that you.
Absolutely. That's I once again, because of No Telling's sort of lack of success, I didn't know what studios to go to, or who to approach. I mean, it's a weird question because now it seems like so little money that I'm like, yeah. Then we had the 60 grand, but so we shot on film, but everything else didn't cost anything, like all the locations and so on. And I mean, I can't even remember if it was SAG because they were just my friends. I mean, it was 60 grand over like 2 years. So,
Okay.
Yeah, it's not like everything about this movie was.
It's not like you had the 60 grand up front and then
No.
you shot it in a month. It was like it
No.
took you 2 years to make it.
It's like, and so I went to Irwin Young. He ran this place called DuArt, which developed movies, and I made a deal with him. I got like 30% off of everything that the lab would do because he was a real supporter of film. So the real hustle was more about favors and stuff. I think when I say it cost 60 grand, it's because that's what it ended up costing. But it didn't feel like we ever found 60 grand.
Right.
But we made deals like I just described, and it was all about, and I guess it is relevant because that's basically how I made Blackout. Literally 30 years later, that's still how I prefer to work, having felt rejected by the industry. But of course, in between, I had an amazing producer who paid for the movies. But I guess I'm just sort of back where I started. Anyway, so with Habit, we had to pay for the film, but the developing was on Irwin. But this is the real point. So I said I had my one friend, Dayton. He was my producer and my comrade. And we said, it was his idea, but I was into it. He said, we're not going to pay the crew because then they'll never be paid enough. So this is a pure voluntary thing. So we had only 5 crew members. We also said we're going to have different DPs because we can't have the burden of somebody feeling like they're being used or abused. And so we said, we know what we want. I had planned the whole thing, every frame, every shot, every location, which all were going to be stolen or friends' houses. And then we met Frank DeMarco. He was a friend of Dalton's. And I keep calling him Dalton because my son's best friend is Dalton, but his name is Dayton. It's only that I haven't seen Dayton for so long. So Dayton Taylor, and he invented, I mean, that's the thing. I paid him. That was where that's where 10 grand went. It's not that I paid him. I invested in his invention, which was this camera that did the Matrix effect.
A bullet time camera?
He invented this camera. It's in the Smithsonian. And technically, I financed it. So, I don't know if my name is in the fucking Smithsonian. I don't know what's going on with that. But, when you picture the array, if you know anything about the Matrix, so, you fire the gun or you lean over backwards, whatever the hell goes on in that movie, and then a frozen moment, the camera's going around. That's because they have DSLRs, 5Ds or whatever, all in a row like this. But Dayton, not Dalton, figured out how to do that on film in a single thing. So it's this cool array. It's almost like a bike chain, and it's like that. And he spins it around, or he sets it up, and then he'll take the shot, and it's that frozen moment. It's the conceit is that from a different angle at the same moment. That's why you can do a dolly around a single moment. Anyway, brilliant. He was a brilliant person, and so he had all these cockamamie ideas. So he did eventually make that camera, and there was a lot of talk about who invented it because of the Matrix. They did it with cameras, but they didn't invent a single apparatus. That's why his thing's in the Smithsonian, but the Matrix is still the Matrix, so I don't know which better. Anyway, it's all good. Everybody happy there, and then Dayton went on to use that in commercials and travel the world, and he was the guy with the thing. So, and then I used it not in Habit because it wasn't invented yet, but then I used it again, or I invited him to do it in a movie I made called Wendigo, And there's a moment when the kid's like, and it was snowing. I deliberately said, let's have every possible thing that would celebrate the frozen moment. So it's a dolly around a frozen moment of a kid, and there's like snow in the air. It's really great. And
So
then-
that camera wasn't using Habit, it was using Wendigo.
no, it wasn't invented. I gave him the money
Right.
to be my slave for however, literally however long it took. And by the end, he was begging me. He was like, "Stop making me do this," because I was like, Dayton, I still need the accounting. I mean, the movie was long done, and I was like, we got to now account for it because there's going to be
Right.
bills forever.
You're assetting that camera for the
Yeah. So he was literally almost in tears going, I got it. This has to end. And I was like, all right. So eventually, and then he left the country. He lives in.
you ran out of
That was the only way he could
I gotta get away
him
from
off.
fucking Fessenden.
This is why you haven't seen him for a little while.
That's why I can't remember his name. Yeah. I blocked him out of my mind. No, I love you, Dayton Taylor. So anyway, blah, blah, blah. We made the movie. I can't remember the point of the story, but yeah. So, Frank DeMarco said, you guys are crazy. I'm going to shoot the whole thing. So here we had an amazing ally. I mean, this is truly an artist. He's gone on to shoot many things. He's a world-class DP. And but it's sweet. He still calls and says, oh, do you have a copy of Habit? Because I still use it on my reel. Because it's a beautifully shot New York story. One of my favorite reviews was like the Village Voice saying, feels like Taxi Driver or Rosemary's Baby or Bad Lieutenant. Those are three pretty cool movies.
Yeah.
So, and it's really the city that did that. It's not my talent, but it may be Frank's talent. Anyway, so that was the movie. It was cool. And but make no mistake, total flop. Didn't get into fancy festivals. I went to Chicago. The good thing is Roger Ebert saw it. He liked it. So a year later, I literally couldn't sell this fucking movie. And I was very bitter because I thought actually it was pretty good. And I thought I'd worked hard. And so I explained the crew wasn't paid.
Right. Yeah.
It was voluntary. But we shot for 45 days. Now you're going to say, well, good night. That's a lot of what the hell. But that's because we'd shoot for a couple hours. And then one of my guys, the AC or something, Jay Silver, he'd say, well, I got a gig tomorrow. And we go, that's fine. All right, why don't we meet Thursday? What time's good for people? So you see, it was very much...
It's a passion project.
it was
for
a hangout
everybody.
project,
Yeah.
But of course I had to also wrangle the actress. We had... I'm not diminishing the ambition of it. We shot all over New York, lots of different locations. But it was all favors and this and that. And remember, I had that performance art community. I had, parties, and it was an aesthetic of literally the New York scene. People were used to having parties or coming and showing up in costumes, and it was Halloween every day in the East Village and this kind of thing. So one thing I like to think about is that movies are portraits of the time that you're making them, no matter what you're making. I mean, you're really just documenting. If the actor's in a bad mood, it's going to affect the performance. It's fascinating to realize the burden on the actors, but then everybody. So, what I'm saying is that there's an element of that Werner Herzog perspective, which is, we are capturing the moment. And, there's a scene in Habit where I have to hang out a window, and I am deathly afraid of heights. But we just put the little climbing diaper on, and we hooked it into a thing. I have a moment, a picture of me with with Jay Silver again. And we're looking at a book of knots, and we're going like, well, okay, I think you flip that over, flip that over here, pull it tight. That's a climbing knot. That'll work on Mount Everest and hopefully on the 6th floor of this fucking window. So we're doing all that, and we just tie it to the radiator and hope that, everything's cool.
That's the weak point.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, it's pretty hairy. I mean, I think it plays in the movie. To be honest, Frank, who was quite grumpy all the time, he didn't lean out as much as we were leaning out. So I don't know if you get the vertigo, but you get the gist. It's pretty startling in the movie.
Experience groundbreaking cinema on Mubi with the stunning 4K restoration of Tarsem Singh's The Fall. Filmed over 4 years in 28 breathtaking locations and starring Lee Pace, it's a monumental production that transcends genres. For a limited time, you can try Mubi free for 30 days at mubi.com/shittyrigs.
Can you tell me the story now?
Close your eyes.
I mean, that's an awesome approach, and also I think a risky approach to filmmaking, because if people are volunteering their time to be on your project, you're expecting that they'll come back. One, right? So you're hoping for a consistency in your crew, but also like it takes a longer time to finish your film.
Yeah,
so it's a
absolutely.
very interesting approach that you take. So I'm curious, it's like why you feel so confident in that approach as to filmmaking, as opposed to like looking for the bulk of the money and then shooting for a solid block of time.
Well, it's a very good. Once again, I think it helps the real conversation here, which is like, for somebody watching, like, how would you do it? The thing, what it was about was sort of demanding a kind of commitment to the art and to the project that said, I'm in it 120%, and I invite you to be in it. I don't expect you to be. You have to believe in your leader, because I do believe in film is there's a fearless leader. It's not like other things. That's the point. There's an element of hoping, demanding, and earning trust with your team. Now, these two kids who were my crew members working for Frank, he was more experienced, but the two kids, they literally met on the train coming from Chicago to seek their fortune in New York City. They met on the train and they became friends, and they both volunteered to be in the movie. So you see, for them, it was a life journey. It was a singular thing that they'll always talk about. Now, what I think is interesting for this conversation is that I continued my company after Habit, and we would make movies with that spirit. But there's a point at which you run out of the ability to ask people to come back and work for, well, first of all, I never did the free thing again. Let me tell you the punchline of the story is that I got the Spirit Award called the Someone to Watch Award. So, all right, so the movie didn't sell. A year went by. Then I get a call from a guy in Chicago, said, can we show that movie? We saw it at the Chicago Film Festival. It was really cool. What happened to it? And I said, absolutely nothing. And he says, well, we'd like to do a run of it here. So I said, great, that's fantastic. So we planned a run. About the same time, I got a call saying, you're shortlisted for this award. It's a Spirit Award called the Someone to Watch Award. I said, well, that's great. And what's the award for? And it's like somebody who has tirelessly worked and never been recognized. I thought, can you imagine? I said, did my mother set you up for this? So that was very sweet. So this is what I did. I went to Chicago. I played the movie. And literally, it was Friday night. I got my reviews. They were all incredible, like the greatest, most realistic vampire movie ever made, this type of thing. Roger Ebert gave it three stars and said it was better than the David Lynch movie that was out. I mean, it was a little embarrassing because I didn't need to have them waste ink on hating David Lynch, but that's what that was. Anyway, and the next day I went and received my award. That was cool. And then I did a whole bunch of meetings in L.A. Mm-hmm. And the funny thing is that I'd written a script, and it wasn't a horror script. And so everybody's like, I don't understand. What's going on? And I was so sad that I went home from Hollywood and I wrote Wendigo, like overnight, because that was a childhood fear I had of the Wendigo. But when I got the Someone to Watch Award, I got up on stage and I said, I want to thank you for this. It was a $10,000 check. And I said, I just want you to know this money is going to my crew. And I know that Irwin Young, the head of the DuArt Lab, is right in the back. Don't tell Irwin what I'm doing with this money. So I paid the crew, and I continued to pay them as the money came in for that movie. So they got paid for 45 days of work.
Oh, wow.
That's great.
That's,
Yeah.
that's
Because
awesome.
I mean that whole thing is kind of like a good story in the sense of, like, you could easily take the, if you want to call them failures or just not recognition, and put that into such a dark mindset and just not keep pushing forward or something like that.
That's
But
definitely my message.
But to
is,
keep the positive attitude and keep going.
You got to
whether or
believe
not-
in yourself. You got to fight for your crew. You got to fight. You got to fight the man. So I self-distributed the movie. I still didn't sell it, even though I had the frickin' Someone to Watch award. and I gave the 10 grand away, but then I self-distributed the movie. Now, I did not four-wall. That's another use of money. What I did was I would go to the theater, and you make an arrangement. Now, this is going to be old-timey talk, but, you know, you'd say, I'll pay $300 for an ad in the Village Voice. I'll pay, you know, $200 for an ad in the New York Times. I mean, these are going to be like 3 millimeters, but that was a thing. So by doing that commitment, then they make the deal with you and they say, all right, we're going to do 60-40 till you hit this number, and then we'll give you, you know, we'll do 10-80. 1080. See, my math. This is why I actually
That's
have,
movie accounting right there. That's movie accounting.
10 is just like, I don't know. It's here somewhere. So whatever happened, but so we started opening, and the cool thing is, as far as my education, I got to know all the theater owners across the country. I mean, I call Greg Lemley still. He just opened Blackout for me. And now it's his son, I think. But the point is that it was great because I started to learn about theatrical distribution and so on. And we opened in 40 cities. But once again, just like the movie itself, with just one thing at a time. We got the cover of, you know, the Albany Times. A picture of me with my shirt off, my arms slit open, all of this. So it had a nice flavor to it. And it was really where I developed this philosophy of what I just said. You're defending your crew members, the vision, and you're not letting the business put you down. So we did okay, and then of course we finally got a Blu-ray deal, or whatever. They weren't called Blu-rays, a DVD deal. It was not a DVD. I'm just making that up. It was a VHS. So we got what's called video. We got a video deal. So, you know, one of the questions you've been asking is like, how does it work? So in those days, you'd do some sort of theatrical. Honestly, that was often a losing proposition, unless you were, you know, Blair Witch, but you weren't. But you do some theater stuff, but that gave a legitimacy to the movie. And then you would sell your physical media, which was that. But you'd also have television rights, cable rights, and then, of course, foreign. And we sold to Germany. We sold here and there. I mean, it wasn't big, but all those little pieces come in, and then your bank account is like got some life to it. And I would pay out to my crew. So that was that. Then, as I said, I went to Hollywood. I have fun stories, you know, sitting in James Cameron's office, just doing a meeting, trying to say how cool I was. And then, you know, but on the wall was like a huge bulletin just on a chalkboard, like the Titanic, and, you know, just numbers. And like they were in the middle of making that movie. And then in the back is the Terminator statue. I mean, it was cool being in Hollywood. You know, they call it the water bottle tour.
Yeah, we've heard this.
You know, where you go and you're chomping your gums. As I say, I didn't really have a horror movie, and you know what's interesting is they were all really like, well, do you have a thing with like special effects? Because CGI was new, and they were all wanted any movie with something going on. So I went home and wrote Wendigo, and then I took that to Sundance. I thought I'm going to just hang out at Sundance and sort of drum up some business because I got my Spirit Award. And again, with that place, always bumming me out. They had this little teeny movie. I saw the poster, and it was almost evoked what I was planning for Wendigo, this little face in the woods. And I was like, oh, I'm going to go to this movie. No one else will go. It's some random... It was called the Blair Witch Project. Well, it was like... So I went to that. I had to almost, you know... claw people's eyes out to get a ticket, and I went, and you know it was cool, but I was also obviously very frustrated, and people raised their hand and said thank you for reinventing horror, and I was like, "Arr." So it was
You weren't there.
Yeah, God damn it. Anyway, I saw Blair Witch. I was depressed, but I managed to convince this guy that I had a low budget movie that was just like Blair Witch, and so he gave me $50,000 to make a movie, and I was like, God, I never thought I'd be a snob, but actually, I wish I could find more. So I designed this thing where I had every shot imagined and all the way the creature was going to be, and so on and so on. And then I met this guy, Jeff Levy-Hinty, and he was in sort of another circle, not the horror world, but he was a post-production house and a producer of indie films in New York City. And I managed to impress him with my enthusiasm and the clarity with which I wanted to make this movie. And I said, I have a location. And I had all the drawings. I'd already been working with a comic book artist that I met at Cooper Union or whatever. And I had been... So I just had it so mapped out that he bought out the $50,000 and financed the movie at more like $250,000.
Oh, wow.
So there we were, and he had made movies, and so he put me up with a really cool casting person who's Walken and Jaffe. That's Christopher Walken's wife. Wonderful lady, you know, these are legit New York types. And we cast Patricia Clarkson, who is a wonderful actress of note, not a horror scream queen or something. She's a legit actress. I got a great actor, Jake Weber, and I got the kid from Malcolm in the Middle, which was a TV show. So that's like, I don't know anything about TV, but that's like having somebody that people really do know, a kid. We shot in my house, which I had bought. I mean, it's embarrassing, but I drove up. My wife and I have been looking, clearly not intending to really buy a house. We'd been driving around upstate just because it was fun, and we knew some people there. So, and then you'd have a broker drive you around, and you'd go to a place, and you go, well, this isn't for us. But then I saw this one house, and I was like, oh, my God, it's perfect for the movie. I'm a little teasing, but it was on my mind. So we bought it in November, and in February I was shooting. The problem is that I also had a kid in November, and then I abandoned my wife and kid and went to make the movie. But I figured I wasn't very useful in those first months. I don't know if that's the way my wife sees it. Anyway, we made the movie. Now that one we made.
Which movie is this?
This is called Wendigo.
Wendigo, okay.
And that movie, you know, it was in the snow, so we had to make it when we made it. And everything about Habit was no longer true. We were paying people. We made it in 18 days, all the usual stuff. We did shoot film. But in a weird way, my model still existed because when everybody packed up to go, I got my friend Jay Silver, who it's the third time I've mentioned him, but it just shows that I believe in loyalty. He had been on Habit. He was the kid that came from Chicago on a train and became the AC on Habit. And I invited him to be the DP of the animations of nature, which is really what defines this movie. It's a pretty cool movie, but the monster's terrible. It was a disaster. But it's still spooky because you just see shadows moving across landscapes. And I'd send him out with a book, and he'd sit there with his camera doing animation. So he'd come back literally after 5 hours, and he'd have 12 seconds of film. And it's the coolest stuff in the movie. So that was this beautiful thing. And then my friend Dayton came and did a Spurley spinning camera.
He used the Matrix camera.
Yeah. So, you know, my story is about loyalties, continuum, and the things that matter to me, which is a sense of history and fighting for each other. One vision is guiding the movie itself, but we're all in it together. Anyway, that was Wendigo. That did better. It opened at Film Forum, which is very, very fancy. And it was the first movie by Magnolia Films, which is like the original A24. You know, it's a cool... I'm sorry I can't, like, whip out one of their famous movies, but, you know, they do Lars von Trier movies and this kind of stuff.
Since you did both processes, you did a movie over 2 years for no money, and you did this movie in 18 days with money. You know, what are the differences there that you see that come out of the movie?
Yeah, and
not even in the process of it, or like.
And what did you learn from that first movie that you brought on to the second one that kind of helped you get to that process?
The thing I learned from the first movie is I already am a filmmaker. I'm not saying I'm a good filmmaker or that I have any of the secrets, but I have a process, and it's just about refining that and being light on your feet, knowing how to deal with adversity, which comes in the form of weather, certain personalities, and just the great void between what you sort of have in your head and your heart and the writing process when you're listening to music and you're oh my God, this is the best scene in the movie. And then, you're on set and you're like, oh my God, everybody's complaining, they're cold. And you're just like, oh my God. So, I mean, and yet, you want to be respectful of everybody, and you want to do the right decisions. I have a friend who says making movies is making as few bad decisions as possible. And it's so true because I find it, hard dealing with an AD, which is the assistant director. If they're not sharper than you, which is really what you want them to be, you want them to be guiding the movie. And then if you feel they're not as committed or that their loyalties are slightly off, I don't know. I find it's difficult. What I fall back on is trying to engender a sense of loyalty by being a cheerleader for the project. In fact, so every Glass Eye movie, we always say the mantra is safety first, the movie is second, and feelings are third. And by that I mean we're all fighting to make the movie that we want. We all want to be part of something that's cool. I hope it's clear that safety means safety and in every sense, from the gunplay to any kind of stunts, but then, that people feel respected in whatever way. Then the movie is second. And then, feelings are third means this isn't about ego. This is so sometimes you're going to have your feelings hurt if your idea is shut down, and it's not about the directors. The director has to be responsible enough to everybody that it should never become a thing that, that's the ego talking. No, it's serving the movie. I always believe in, 10-hour days, 12-hour days. I don't believe in going over. I don't believe in look how much we've suffered. I mean, I celebrate Herzog and I will hang out a window, but I would never ask anyone else to do anything that was remotely inappropriate or unsafe. I really believe sort of in the warm blanket of making everybody feel really good and that we're all in it together. And I wrote a book after I made that first movie called Low Impact Filmmaking, and it's about trying to do right by environmental issues while you're making a movie. In other words, what I'm getting at is that I've always felt that the mission is community, and then out of that should become the strength to make the movie. We all know you can have a terrible experience on a movie, and the movie can be good, but that it doesn't interest me. I think the idea is to be able to create an ideal society while doing the work.
It's not good because you suffered.
Yeah. Now, I mean, it's always a joke on my set as well. You must suffer, but that's supposed to be, because you're struggling for some form of excellence, whatever your version is. But when it tips into, as I say, some sort of egotistical thing, or it doesn't mean anything if people haven't suffered, that's not interesting to me. And in every regard, I made a joke about the cold, but that's because I think you should be tough. Mm-hmm. This is not. So I want toughness, but not abuse. I think there's a fine line, and the reality is that fine line is because the people at the top should be understanding, but we're not coddling. So I don't know. Maybe this is an old-fashioned conversation. I'm sure I'd be canceled talking about it, but I'm just like, we got to be in there. This is not. If you're a filmmaker, there's a physical.
There's definitely a fine line. You're not going out of your way to. You're not doing this because you want to put people in terrible conditions.
No,
it's just it's a movie that takes place during the winter, so you're in the winter.
Yes.
It is what it is.
Well, yeah. Segue to my next film, which was called The Last Winter. And so I wanted to make a sequel to Wendigo because I was very bitter that the snow melted and I didn't get my ending, which was the monster running through the woods and it was supposed to be white. And then the trees, like Kurosawa or some sort of very abstract, it didn't happen. Even back in 2000, the winters were much shorter. And I said, fuck this. I'm going to make a movie in the real fucking winter. We're going to make a movie in Alaska, and it's going to be about oil drilling and, the collapse of the climate. It's going to be my climate change monster movie like The Thing meets, what's the joke? The Al Gore movie, whatever it's called. Oh, my God. Inconvenient Truth.
Yes.
And, in fact, that's how it was reviewed. As The Thing meets Inconvenient Truth. So at least I achieved that level of success. We couldn't film in Alaska because we went up there. It was amazing. And but they didn't have the infrastructure. So we went to Iceland. This was my same producer. So here again, we looked for money, but I felt I had a real partner. So I didn't sweat that. I just happily waited around and did everything I could, tried to cast it as fancy as I could, tried to, I was a real team player. This was the closest I came to feeling taken care of. And he eventually found the money, but it wasn't from Sony or something. That's where we started going to those kind of companies. But he found it, and Iceland kicked in and all this. And that was a cool production because he's such a good producer. So I'm eternally grateful for that. I had Ron Perlman. I had Connie Britton. And I had the kid who ended up going to be on Friday Night Lights. So whatever, that would be technically my biggest movie. It was eventually bought.
Obviously, there are some concessions that you have to make when you're doing lower budget projects or something like that. Like you said that you're bitter that the snow melted and you didn't get the shot that you wanted. But
I begged my producer for fake snow.
But if
no.
But if it goes out of its way to then get you to this other project because you still have that vision and you want to push it and you want to do a whole another project that gets you that shot that you wanted, it's a good thing in the end, right?
Everything's a good thing unless you're, in a basement being tortured. That is hard to rationalize. This isn't so bad.
Yeah.
I think there's some things that are just bad. But, the ups and downs of filmmaking, you're on a journey. You're supposed to be in a rapport with your own sense of self and stamina. And and what is your vision? Why are you doing this anyway? Hopefully that has to do with resilience and the human condition. The thing that the kids don't understand is life is brutal. It always has been. Whatever level of privilege you have, it's still a struggle. You're anxious. You don't know how you fit in. You feel people are attacking you. You feel you don't have enough. You never have security. And all the things that that we cherish and, like family and holidays, everybody knows those things are tenuous at best. Life is a struggle, is my opinion. But from there, of course, you want good results. So I felt very happy with Wendigo. I had my own disappointments with my own failings because I didn't put my foot down about the monster. And I left town. I had this beautiful rubber suit and a guy that was willing to play in it. I had some cool legs that I had spent personal money on making, in order to alleviate my producer's worries. A lot of that didn't work out. And then when it came to set, they'd put the fur on it and it looked like a fucking shag carpet. I was heartbroken. I never have recovered. I haven't recovered yet. It's just like making the monsters that I see in my head. That's where I do pine away. I don't pine away at all, but I'm saying that's where money would help. At some point, I started having, my company had enough things going that I had interns. This is where the company actually became a real company. So this guy named James McKinney came in to work for me. And he said, why don't we do something called scare flicks, which are no-budget movies, because that's what his history was. And he said, you give me, what was it? I don't know, 15 grand or something, and I'll go make a movie in Maine. And there was enough money going around with the Wendigo and this and that, I was able to do that. And I sent him off with his own team. He made a movie up there. And it came out, and this is the thing. In those days, we sold it. We sold this very little film. Now, I got Angus Scrimm to be in it. He's famous for the Phantasm films. And so that was where I started becoming a little bit more of a, producer, see? Hey, I got an idea, kid. Write a picture for Angus Scrimm, get it? And then eventually Ty West came and started to work for me. Well, he was an intern. And I really thought he had talent. And I said, well, when you get out of college, you come back with a pitch, and I'll make your first feature. He did. And he made that movie. And I got people that he knew, and I started building up a team of producing types. And I sent them off. Very often just sent them off. And then I'd be invited to come and play a cameo and get killed or something. Mm-hmm. And then there's another one where we said, let's get Tom Noonan, because I knew Tom from just literally my neighborhood on 4th Street. I would know. I said, Tom, you want to be in a movie? We'll pay you a lot for one day. Of course, what I didn't tell him is like 12-page script, meaning 12 pages to memorize. But that's the thing about actors. It's like one day of work, but you got to learn the lines. So believe me, I get that all the time. Hey, Larry, come down, do one day. And it's like, oh, here's the monologue.
3 weeks of work.
My God, I can't remember that shit anymore. But so this is how I started building the actual Glass Eye. It was beyond my movies. It started to be about these young whippersnappers. And Ty's movie, it more than doubled. We sold it to Showtime. And, it was so thrilling. And then it had foreign deals, and Eli Roth thought Ty was a genius. So then Ty was having all this good stuff happening. And then James McKinney, we still sold his movie, and then I said, make another one. Part of the mission was like, I don't care what your story's about. We're going to do it within our means,
right,
by sheer will and exuberance. And so McKinney's next movie is called Automatons, and he shot in Super 8, black and white, and it's like robots in the future. And it's literally like people dressed in trash cans. I mean, you would laugh, except that it is so creepy. Mm-hmm. And like, whoa, 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 whoa. It's mesmerizing. You're like, oh my God. So it's like an art movie. And the New York Times thought it was the best thing ever. And we had Angus Scrimm in it again. And that movie had a great life. So, and then I had a friend who had a theater. So yes, this is the point. I didn't make it clear. I made Ty put his movie in the theater to follow the Habit example. So we played it in New York, in L.A. I mean, I can't remember the receipts, but I can tell you that people thought we had a theatrical movie, like a little indie film that came out. And then, as I say, because of the Showtime deal, I was feeling like, sure, let's put it out. So this was the idea. You give these movies a little extra oomph. And then we got in mind that they should all play at drive-ins. So we tried that for a while. I mean, not everything worked, because you would need a whole staff of people. The reality was mostly me and some intern, and then the director was always involved. Interested. And then I started having producers. Well, then, so the final real chapter of this, finally, is that MPI, which is a company in Chicago, they agreed to make Ty's next movie, which was called The House of the Devil. And they had made a famous horror film called Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer with Michael Rooker. But they didn't know what to do with that success. They were a company that basically sold all VHSs of things like the Ollie North trial, just random stuff that, would have a market. So they were sort of in the business of finding weird TV shows and putting them out. But then they wanted to get involved in producing. So they made House of the Devil, and it was hugely successful. And it was actually bought by Magnolia, which had done Wendigo. And that was the first movie that went to streaming. And I was like, where's the accounting? We never knew how many people watched that movie. When you have videos, when you print 1,000 DVDs of a movie, it's like the newspapers used to be. You would get 300 back, and that meant you sold 700, and you kind of knew what was going on in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There was a metric.
With streaming, you don't know. Just, you might as well give the thing away. I mean, obviously there's an exchange of money,
Yeah.
but you don't get residuals, or I don't know. The whole point is that the model just sort of vanished.
Yeah.
I could tell you exactly what I sold the Roost for, and pretty much what it cost. I mean, I can almost tell you how many units it sold, but I don't know anymore. I don't know what goes on. Everything just vanishes.
When it gets sold to streaming on something like that, like back then, was it for like 5 years or something? Like, is it?
It's a good question. I can't remember, because the thing to know is that
I feel like it's even now streaming's different than it was then. It's like
Yes.
they're like
I mean, I think there are terms, and obviously one of the complaints is that Netflix makes movies and we don't know what goes on. It's just
Right.
literally, it's just
They
a
did it.
black hole.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody gets paid up front because nobody trusts anybody. So if there's anything I'm trying to impress upon our listeners in this particular conversation, is that I have still tried to build the company on trust, which is, it's an ethereal, eccentric commodity. I'm not really saying, but I wish that was more what we cared about in this world, because then you kind of know that you're working towards something that has honor and other abstractions involved, which isn't like, as opposed to money, it's like, in fact, has to do with money. So MPI had success with that single film, which they just invested in because we found them and said, would you like to support this film? And then they made like a 3-picture deal, which was something you hadn't heard of since, olden times, like a 3-picture deal. And sure enough, they wanted to make a tentpole movie, a tiny movie, and a medium size, just like Goldilocks. And it was like fantastic. So finally, and I got some overhead for it, and then they were paying for the movie. So I was getting paid to make movies. This was like gold. It's different from making your own film, and you're just constantly aware of the horror of it all. So then I found...
that's the truth.
Yeah. So I found this dude who had always wanted to work for me, a young filmmaker, and his name was Jim Mickle, and he was fantastic. He had a writing partner named Nick D'Amici, and they had a web series that they wanted to make. And I said, whoa, whoa, whoa now, soldier. That's going to be the tentpole movie. So tentpole in those days meant maybe $800,000 from MPI. And there were demands and conversations, but bottom line is MPI loved it. And Nick and Jim Mickle are salt of the earth. Great guys. Mickle came up through Crew. So he was, he had a team. A lot of what I've done is I'm not like trying to control, you got to work with these people. I'm like, no, who do you have? What world have you built? Let's bring it on board. We'll all work together. So it's more about that kind of building. And indeed, all the people that Jim Mickle knew came aboard his movie, and then they became part of the extended Glass Eye family, because we were, giving them the opportunity, and everybody shown, and it's a great film. It's called Stakeland, and it's as good as any of the Walking Deads, and it's got its own personality. Spears and Gerner were on that. Brian Spears, he made the zombies, which were, oh my God, no, they're vampires. They look a lot like zombies. So whatever, that was just a uplifting experience. We shot upstate, which is where I have a house and Mickle has a place. So we have since become, known as the upstate filmmakers. We've made maybe 10 movies up there, Glass Eye. Not really giving them a lot of money, but bringing people up, hotels, Craft service, I mean, it's hard to say, you know, because the thing that's happened is now Netflix comes and shoots in upstate New York, and all my, you know, the Hudson Valley Film Commission, which is a great institution, been incredibly supportive of us. But let's face it, now they boast about their Netflix movies. I'm like, well, but we also made a movie this year, and they're like, and you are. No, I'm teasing them because actually they are incredibly loyal to their indie films. But it is true that now, you know, there's a new sheriff in town, and it's called Netflix. So fuck them. But, you know, this is good for the crews up there and everything. All that's good.
Yeah.
So the weird thing about my career, and it's not the same for Jim Mickle, Ty West, Kelly Reichert, a lot of them have expanded. I don't know, something about my vision and just sort of my stubbornness. I've sort of stayed in this zone, and I continue to make low-budget movies. But I love the excitement that new talent has. New ideas, and I just like the aesthetic. I mean, I'm an environmentally minded person. I just like not wasting. I mean, I go on a real shoot because I'm an actor. I go on Hollywood shoots. I was in Killers of the Flower Moon. Mm-hmm. I'm like, holy shit. Because, you know, the thing that's in the frame is still that. It's just that. And, you know, I guess you got to have the nice craft service and the this and the that and the fancy cars driving you from one block to another. But that is a choice. That's not the only way to do this. So as long as what's in the frame is compelling, I still believe you can make movies at every level. I love being on big movies. And, of course, the craftsmanship, the effort, the precision. I mean, all of that is, I'm not a film snob. I love all kinds of movies. Although I don't think I've seen all 30 of the Marvel Universe. But actually, I've seen every Jurassic Park movie many times because I love dinosaurs.
I mean, I think there's something to be said about you staying true to, the type of way that you want to make films and also the type of movies that you want to make. I mean, with Blackout, you know, your most recent film, there is still that sort of story philosophy where it's a monster movie, but there is commentary about, you know, contemporary evils that are happening inside of this universe too, because your character's up against a person who is basically buying up the town, and he's controlling the town, right, you know, with this power. And so you have this other sort of power that's up against it. So I'm curious, like, how now Blackout, you know, this recent film of yours, how do you feel like this film has, you know, taken all of your experience and made it the sort of successful film that it is? Because you have a lot of support from this community that you've built. Like when Bert and I, after like we learned about you, like you're on the Criterion Collection, like you have a lot of like, I guess I would say support from people in the filmmaking industry that recognize all the work that you've done. So I'm curious, like, how has all of that experience come to Blackout, and you know, what have you taken to make this latest work of yours?
Well, I think I have just a niche, which is like, oh, he's the horror guy that makes the little art films, and then people know my association with, as I say, my more successful comrades. So I think I'm known as just a hands-on kind of. There's a certain aesthetic to it.
Sure.
I call it tactile filmmaking, you know.
Yeah.
But as for my own films, I mean, people are charmed that I love monsters, and it's old school, you know. I'm always arguing about the flat-faced werewolf. I don't know if you know enough about monsters, but you know, everybody expects it to look like The Howling or American Werewolf in London, and I'm like, well, no, I grew up on Wolfman. That's a fucking wolfman, not a dog. So, you know, there's all this is all the minutia in the horror world. But because I sort of call back to an older time, but people know that I'm also fairly passionate about like the way we conduct ourselves and the way humanity has betrayed itself through its own stupidity and greed and avarice. Because you have that message, I think it shows that you're paying some attention. And also, you know, the way I speak about the crew and even about art and cinema. These are just sort of, I think it's sort of, I stand for something, and I think some people are charmed by that, but it doesn't actually pay the bills. So, you know, Blackout, you asked what experience did I bring to it. Well, the fact is once again, I'm using with the tiniest crew I can, not because I don't love my brother crewmen, but because I can't afford them, and the prices have gone up. And I can't cry poor, you know, to the same crew members, literally movie after movie, because they know that I've sustained this. But the only reason I have is that I work as cheaply as possible with the respect and make it a good time, feed people well, make them feel involved, and that this will be that special thing they do, and then they can go back and make the real money somewhere else. So I believe in it. It's almost like, come to my little boot camp. We'll be quick. Now, that's the only difference between the other model I described of Habit, is that at least the real shoot with the quote actors, that'll be quick. We'll be in and out because I'm a very impatient person. But then when I'm editing, I can reshoot, because the movie has its own life, and you have to honor that and let it percolate, and maybe you do pickups and so on.
Did you also edit Blackout?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I believe in making the whole movie. It's not an ego thing. It's just that that's how I work. I want to get in there with the material. It doesn't mean that they're, and when I'm producing for someone, I say, well, you might consider an editor, or we could bring in an editor for a week at the end, or, whatever. In other words, let's all be realistic. There are different ways to work. There's different relationships to the material. Some people can't see past it. I get it. And I'm too old to care whether I'm doing it right. I'm doing it my way. And it's not the right way. It's my way. It's just like, that's my experience. I make a movie. I have to be the editor because I've worked with other editors. I find it very alienating. They're just different priorities, and it's not the same zone. It's like saying, yeah, I'm a guitarist. I like to have other people do the guitar. And I tell them, it's like, no, you're doing, that's why are you doing this? This is insane. I really don't even mean what I'm saying. Look, it's the second past. I'm already talking trash.
Even
I love editors.
What you were
I am
doing
an editor.
when you started doing your editing on that 3/4 inch
Thank you. You're absolutely right.
tape, it's like, yeah, if you did that, like, why wouldn't you just?
It's my relationship to the process.
Yeah.
It's,
Well, and there's something too. It's like if you're thinking about the edit when you're shooting,
Yes.
you already know how it's going to be pieced together. That's something completely different than.
Thank you, Bert. That's the real point.
Yeah.
The other thing is, I don't. I make movies cheaply, but that's because I know how. I say we're only shooting for the edit.
Yeah.
I'm not here to have an experience and, oh my God, no. I'm like, okay, we got it. And I know that I'm going to be cutting to the guy picking up the thing, so we only have to do the second half. You didn't quite get that. Let's do that again. But I know what my bridge shot is, so we're good. Okay, let's do it again, but we're only doing the second half. You see what I mean? Whereas most inexperienced directors will go, oh, let's do it again from the beginning. And I mean, I understand that, but not when it's the seventh take. We're not here to have an experience. We're here to get the fucking job done. And the experience has to be the work you've done to get there. Mm-hmm. And you're all in the zone. You got to create that by having the meetings beforehand, rehearsals if you're lucky. But just, everyone should be in a zone. And then the work actually can go quickly. I love that, I'm going to quote Woody Allen again. Nobody even knows who he is. He's been canceled. But he would rehearse all day. And then he'd shoot 2 takes, and then it's done. And you watch those movies, like they're these amazing long takes. We fetishize long takes, but you could tell it was just his methodology. I mean, that's just one among many, many filmmakers who.
He would also like take a break mid-production, right? And like, I remember hearing about this. Like, he would shoot, and then they would go dark. He would edit, and then they come back and just get the pieces that he needed.
Well, I'm notorious for. I mean, I'll show my movie and I'll re-edit it. Well, I'll make a change or two after the world premiere. I did that with Blackout. I shot a whole other shot.
That's the director's cut.
Yeah, but the fact is like, well, it's because I don't do test screening, so I admit that. But the point is I don't know. It's a living, breathing thing, and I love theme and variation. I don't even mind if there's different versions of a movie out there. I find it all very. It's just sort of intriguing.
Collector's items.
Yeah, and it's like it's a dialogue. I don't know. I like covers of songs, and then the irony is like, then you hate remakes. Well, because I don't hate remakes, by the way. In fact, I'm remaking Wolfman movies, but it's the point is there's nuance. You also don't trust why they're making a remake. You're like, another Texas Chainsaw Massacre? I mean, come on, guys. What are you bringing to it? It's not even so. It's confusing, but it's like porn. You can recognize the difference between porn and erotic or whatever. There's an old joke about that, and it's kind of true. You kind of got to be in the moment making judgments. There's no hard and fast rule about what's right or what's wrong. I'm talking now about things like remakes and sequels. Sometimes it's exciting, and sometimes
No, but it's also, I mean, if you want to talk about like the film industry as a machine or something like that too, there's plug and plays, and there's a difference between writing, like coming up, conceptualizing something, writing it, directing it, editing it, and you being, and then there's somebody that can only write, and they're not the filmmaker, so somebody else comes in and shoots it, and then somebody else comes in, and that's why there might be this disconnect, or that's why you need those other people, because it's not your baby.
Yeah.
It's somebody else's, and they're passing it along, kind of thing. So, there's reasons for getting different people in different times, but if it's your thing that you want to see through, then yeah, that's
every artist has their method or whatever. Kubrick always adapted books. You think it's because he was stupid, didn't have his own ideas? No, but that's what he did. Whereas I always celebrate Taxi Driver because that's like, to me, pure cinema, meaning it was literally written for the screen. But I also reference One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, a favorite movie. Even Jaws, as everybody knows, one of my favorite movies. Well, those are based on books. So there's no rules. I don't want rules. And then there are these weird things that it's like you didn't even realize it was based on something. And you're like,
Right.
oh, well, that's cool.
you've just seen it so many times that it's
Yeah, or
ingrained
it's
in
just
you.
some. But the bottom line is that, and then, whatever. Then they're cliches like there are only 3 stories, or maybe there's 7. I don't remember how many there are, but I know there's very few. But the point is, look, we already said John Wick, experienced movers, same picture. But the bottom line is, I don't know what the bottom line is. There is no bottom line. It's all just like you got to be in the moment, judge people for their intentions. I think we don't trust the companies that are making movies anymore because they're not really movie companies. That's why you romanticize these producers from the 70s who were fighting to make The Godfather. It's because they were actually movie makers. That's what they wanted to do when they grew up.
Yeah.
Now it's run by
It's like
Somebody that-
algorithms.
somebody that wants to make money.
deciding who's getting cast.
people always wanted to make money, but they thought they had to do it by earning it as opposed to tricking people into liking something or, beating you over the head with the same old shit. So anyway, I think everybody calls it differently, but I think that's the job of the audience is to call it out when they see it and say, this doesn't seem genuine. I'm looking for authenticity. I'm looking for human connection. I'm looking for trust in my audience and my collaborators and respect, dignity. These are, as I keep saying, I guess they're old terms, but they kind of are kind of what's the point otherwise?
I think it's changing. I mean, I think there's the younger generation sees this crap coming out and they're like, we don't like this, which is why they're, not going to theaters as much. They're looking at their own stuff on YouTube and other outlets. And it's
How could they not? They've been beaten up by late state capitalism or whatever. It's
Late
just
stage capitalism,
Late stage.
yeah.
It's just like this dying old fucking like this dragon. It's like profit motive.
there's your next thing.
Damn, we decided it here, guys. All right, we're having a story meeting next Wednesday. Damn, this is good. Late stage capitalism, the dragon years. Oh my God.
I think.
All right, we got to wrap up.
No, I was just
gonna say,
yeah,
because you want to be out of here pretty soon.
Yeah, because I got a
No,
story
you should have been
meeting.
out of here.
I gotta-
You should have already been out of here.
It's all good.
I have a question for you. Is there something that in your early on that people were like, you have to spend money on this to make a movie, and you realized like later on, there's absolutely no reason to spend money on that to make, like, you don't need to do that.
That's a good question. Well, I believe, when you talk about format, what are we going to shoot on? First of all, film is not out. It's not necessarily more expensive. It sharpens the wit. You're only going to do 2, maybe 3 takes. So, and there are people who will help you because they're like, oh, wow, you're shooting film. So, yeah, there's no thing that's in or out. And as I say, we made a futuristic robot movie on Super 8. It cost, I don't know, I can't remember the number, but it was kind of cheap. And it's as evocative as anything we've done. But having said that, like I have my new script, I got crane shots. I really want to, but it's not crane shots to be it's sort of to have the whole thing sort of floating. So I got to figure it out, and so I don't want to dismiss the importance of money. And of course, I have one crane shot in blackout. I spent a lot of money on that, and I was so excited to. It was in a fulcrum part of the movie, and I was really happy to get that crew in, and they were so cool, and they, just the mechanism of it all really appealed to me. And I think I said I was the AD on my own movie, which made me so happy because it was really just like basically like conducting it. And I knew all the ins and outs because I knew all the different locations where I was going to shoot. I knew all the towns, the shopkeepers. I said, we'll be here from 4 to 7. And if you have any problem with that, you tell us and we'll get right out of your way. We're going to, but, so I enjoyed that was like orchestrating a whole thing all through the town and the cars and the this and that and the accidents. And so I don't know. That's how I like to make
So
movies.
maybe like,
but yeah, you can.
Maybe like just because you don't have the best camera or the best whatever doesn't necessarily mean.
Well,
No,
it's
don't have to
also, I mean,
start.
it seems like what you were saying with the Blair Witch Project. It's like if you put off making your thing because you don't have this one special thing, somebody else might just swoop in and take your idea. So just make your thing with what you have now.
Well, I really believe it. I mean, that's my message. That's why I continue to produce. Is I'm like, okay, well, you can. I mean, I got a movie coming out on Wednesday. Well, Friday. It's called Crumb Catcher. It took us 9 years to make that fucking movie, and the director's insane. And but
you need to be
in that spirit. He worked for me for 10 years, so he's insane because he was driven insane by working at Glass Eye. No, but his dedication, and we had Hollywood stars involved, and then that I mean, it was a lot of things, pandemic and this and that, but we couldn't get the money even with the stars. And then you're like, wow, this just doesn't get easier, and blah blah blah, and eventually he just cracked, and he hired people that were in the Glass Eye circle. It's going to be the greatest performance by John Sparadakis, who's been in like 12 of our movies. He was in Wendigo. I discovered him in an audition. Back to that story about having a great casting director. I met John Sparadakis. He's been in 12 Glass Eye movies since. And he's going to blow it out of the water with Crumb Catcher. He's sort of the crazy villain in the film. Anyway, so that's just the model continues. Chris made that movie over 3 different shoots. He didn't finish in his first shoot, and then he went back and he did it at piecemeal. So the real thing to tell the kids is to break the mold. That's what kids are supposed to do, and then just to take care of each other in the meantime. And then also, there's no format. There's what about Tangerine? That was shot on a cell phone. And that dude's doing fine. I think he just won Cannes. So, there's no real, doesn't mean there are no excuses. And there are many ways to make a movie. It's just find what's right for the project and for your level of patience. Maybe it's worth waiting. If you have, Wes Anderson wanted Gene Hackman. I mean, he was already famous, meaning Wes Anderson was, but still, that was a big go for him. And Hackman said, absolutely not. Who are you, you little putz? Well, Wes stuck it out. So those are good stories, but we shouldn't be deluded by those stories. That's not the common thing. There's also, and then I cast this other person who nobody knew, and now they're getting the attention. So there's that. You see, the point is you can take solace in the stories, but there's no one path. The path is to try to listen to your heart and the people you trust, and build something of your own, and build something that will last. And what will last is your community, your people, and then you hope that expands because you inspire and engage people with your vision. So that's sort of the vibe, I guess.
Awesome.
Nice. Well, before you go, I noticed you caught the label I got earlier, but I wanted to show you this
sweet.
issue of
Oh.
Fangoria that I got that features Blackout on the front cover. I know this is a huge deal because Fangoria has a long history of like acknowledging a lot of indie horror movies out there. So I was wondering if you'd do us the honors of autographing this for us.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, and I got a Sharpie here.
Do you have a Sharpie? This is makeup by Brian Spears
Yeah,
and
talented
Peter
Brian
Gerner,
Spears.
who I believe are alumni of the show.
of Glass Eye Pix.
Yes. Well,
Just make it out to Rap Drinks or Shitty Rigs, wherever you feel like.
This is going on
writing
eBay.
to. Yeah, it's gonna go on eBay. We're actually gonna do an auction after this episode drops, so start the bidding at $100. You know,
100,000.
do we take Bitcoin on this?
Yeah,
Yeah.
speaking of the environment, Bitcoin is
Oh God.
brutal on the environment.
This is awesome.
Shitty rigs.
Right here,
It's awesome.
dude.
Thank you, Larry.
Larry, thank you so much for coming out here
Yeah,
and chatting
thanks.
with us. Thanks for just
Great.
giving us such an awesome, in-depth history of Glass Eye Pix and just your background as a filmmaker and then producer who just loves to get in there and do the work. And hoping that people who watch this will be inspired to like just start shooting,
Start
keep making
making
their own
it,
movies.
yeah.
Because like reality, that's the way to do it. Just get in the trenches. So
Get busy.
yeah, maybe we'll have you back for some more
Oh, I'd
conversations.
love
if
to.
you're
As
up
you
for
can
it.
see, I'm just warming up.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys for tuning in. We'll put information on where you can find Blackout in the description. And yeah, thanks again for watching. We'll see you on the next one.
All right. Thanks, man.
Peace.
Cool.